Hi, my name is Amit Gupta. I work at Air Force University in Montgomery, Alabama, and the bulk of my writings have been on international security issues, though I also write on popular culture and politics. And as I always tell people, Google me. You'll find out all the work I've done. All right, what we're going to talk about today is the Quadrilateral Initiative and the role it is likely to play in the Indo-Pacific. So before we talk about the Quad, it is necessary to define what is the Indo-Pacific. And if you look at the American perception of the Indo-Pacific, it's a reiteration of the old Pacific Command, which operates out of Hawaii, which is now named the Indo-Pacific Command. And it stretches from the western coast of the United States to India. Pakistan goes into CENTCOM. Other countries in the region, however, look at the Quad differently and look at the Indo-Pacific differently. What they say about the Indo-Pacific is, to be truly inclusive, the Indo-Pacific stretches all the way to the east and southern coasts of Africa. And therefore, the Indo-Pacific includes South Africa, Mozambique, Kenya, all the way up to the Gulf, and then back towards the Strait of Malacca. That would make the Indian part of the Indian Ocean part of the Indo-Pacific a more valid geographical and military, strategic, and economic entity. The other part to remember is, why is this so important? And it's a very simple thing. The balance of economic power in the world is changing. By 2050, at the latest, over 50% of global GDP will be coming from this part of the world. And therefore, it assumes far greater importance than it did maybe even 20 years ago. Okay? That is the Indo-Pacific. Now, what we're going to do with the Quad today is simple. First, an explanation of what is the Quad, how did it come about, why did it fade away, why was it revived, and what does it seek to accomplish. The original Quad, which people now refer to as Quad 1.0, came about as a result of the 2004 tsunami. And that was quite simply an ad hoc grouping of nations which had the capability to effectively and quickly send relief around the affected region. And the four countries that fit into that were the United States, Japan, India, and Australia, because they had large enough and capable enough navies to do that. Now, this happens in 2004, and then in 2006, Shinzo Abe, who by then is Prime Minister of Japan, suggests, why do we not bring these countries together in an arc of freedom and prosperity? And what he means by that is, all these countries are healthy democracies. They are also market economies, though the extent to which their market economies varies from country to country. And he says, let us bring these countries together to coordinate strategies on politics and even to bring about some degree of military cooperation. So the first Quad meeting takes place in 2007, and then in late 2007 you have Exercise Malabar, which is the four navies get together, including adding the Singaporean Navy, and that becomes Exercise Malabar. Yet what happens is, in the following years, the idea of the Quad slowly diminishes. And there are good reasons for this. By 2005, 2006, the Chinese have become a major economic player in the world. And increasingly, the countries of Asia are becoming economically interdependent with China. If you look at the Indians, by the late 2007-2008 period, their economy is moving towards greater economic integration. The Australians are starting to sell more commodities like iron ore and copper to the Chinese, and this leads to a boom in the Australian economy. And even the Japanese, who are the most concerned in some ways about China, are the ones who begin to have greater trading links with China. to the extent that today Japan's largest trading partner is China. Okay, so you start to see hesitancy among the members of the Quad. Countries outside the Quad, like South Korea, say we're not really interested in joining because we'd like to keep equidistance between Washington and Beijing. And what worries people in Asia is the Quad the first step towards creating an Asian NATO with the idea of containing China? Add to this, the Chinese start a very effective diplomatic campaign against the Quad, suggesting that it is a hostile step towards restricting China's growth as a great power. And as a result of this, what you see is the idea of the Quad is put on the back burner. People forget about it. And from 2008 onwards, the world is concerned about the global economic collapse. And the Chinese become a very strong partner in preventing a further decline in the global economy. Because what you've got to remember is the United States spends about $780 billion in trying to jumpstart the American economy. But the Chinese spend about $600 billion on their own economy. And that money then goes around Asia to buy commodities and to do trade with other countries. So while Europe goes into a slowdown, America goes into a slowdown, Asia is in a much better shape. What leads to the revival of the Quad? And the revival of the Quad happens mainly because of what a South Korean academic called Chung-Min Lee points out. He says everybody in Asia likes China's economic growth because they all benefit from it. They worry, however, about China's military and political forays. And what you start seeing by about 2015 is a China which is so confident economically now that it starts to flex its political and military muscles. So it starts to do island building in the South China Seas. It gets into naval confrontations is too strong a word, but naval incidents with the Japanese. It gets into a border standoff with India in 2017. And by now, Prime Minister Abe is back in charge in Japan. So he calls for a revival of the Quad. And this becomes the first step towards bringing these countries together. Added to this is one more thing. The United States has been trying to face three strategic challenges since about 2000: Russia, China, and the Middle East. And as the Asians always point out to Washington, you can only do one out of three. And the Trump administration effectively lowers America's footprint in the Middle East by having various Arab nations sign agreements with Israel and starting the process towards the withdrawal in Afghanistan, which is carried out by the Biden administration. So this frees up Washington's attention and its resources to look at China and to give more muscle to the Quad. So what you see in 2021 is the first virtual meeting of the Quad. And in that, the statement that they come out with, joint statement, is actually quite interesting. It says, together, we recommit to promoting the free, open, rules-based order rooted in international law and undaunted by coercion to bolster security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. We stand for the rule of law, freedom of navigation and overflight, peaceful resolution of disputes, democratic values, and territorial integrity of states. We commit to work together and with a range of partners. This is a very important statement because what it's doing is it's essentially saying to the Chinese that while we're not starting a Cold War, while we recognize the need for continued economic trade and interdependence with you, we would like you to understand that the rest of the world still believes in a liberal international order. And that order calls for the peaceful settlement of disputes and not wars in the South and East China Sea. That order calls for the free movement of goods and services, which, if you look at what the Chinese have been talking about in the South China Sea, is to go through there, you need the permission of the Chinese government, which goes against all the principles of freedom of navigation. And overflight, by the way, too. But the other thing that the Quad does, which I think is perhaps even more interesting and important, is the Quad directly addresses COVID-19. It says we, the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, are going to commit resources so that we can produce 1.2 billion doses of effective vaccines and send them around the world. So here what the US is doing is something that it did during the Cold War, which was address the global good of humanity. And what I mean by that is the US talked about reducing famine around the world in the Cold War, and it did so in Mexico and India with the Green Revolution. The US, through the World Health Organization and its partner nations, ensured that the entire world got vaccinated against smallpox. And the last recorded case of smallpox in the world is 1976 in Bangladesh. So there's two ways of looking at the Quad, and let me end with this. One is you can think of it as a military alliance, but it is a long way from there. Or you can look at it as starting to create a regional security architecture which is based on shared values and a shared vision for the future. And I think that is where Washington, Tokyo, Canberra, and New Delhi would like it to go. Thank you.